I firmly believe that business has a really important role in society. Thank you. And that's actually why I'm in business school. And so I organized this panel to debate some key questions I think that exist today in the business and social sector world. I'm excited to be here. And thank you for all the panelists for being here.
My name is Oliver Ibrahim. I'm on the faculty at Harvard Business School, teaching in social enterprise, as well as leadership and organizational behavior. Before I introduce briefly our panelists, I do want to say that Rebecca has done all of the work behind this panel. So she identified the topics, she sought out speakers, she sought me out as the moderator. So I really have the easiest part. I just get to show up, ask a few questions. I don't even really have to prepare. But Rebecca's done really all of the work, and so I really want to acknowledge her. About our panelists, and I'll have them also give a quick introduction to themselves in terms of what they're doing in the creating shared value space. But just, and you've got the bios, but I think it helps just to hear a little bit. So Chili Hidalgo is a senior consultant at FSG, Social Impact Advisors. So he's worked with many, many companies specifically on this issue of creating shared value, from oil and gas companies, Fortune 1000 companies. Prior to that, he was a consultant at Oliver Wyman, so comes with a lot of experience. Glad to have you here. Sebastian Fries is the Chief Giving Officer at TOMS. You all know TOMS. He oversees TOMS shoe and site giving efforts in 40 countries. And prior to that, at Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, he was responsible for their Global Access Initiative in their emerging markets division. Joe Bauer is a professor at Harvard Business School. Over 50 years of teaching material related to general management, both in the MBA program as well as starting a number of executive education programs. Also served on the faculty here at the Kennedy School for a number of years, launching the public management course and program here, and continues to be heavily involved. I do want to mention a recent book of his, co-authored with Lynn Payne and Dutch Leonard, called Capitalism at Risk, Rethinking the Role of Business, which is based on conversations with really hundreds of people in business post-financial crisis to try and understand pre-financial crisis. And I think in a sense actually anticipating some of the issues. So you'll obviously say something about this. Where they were actually talking to people, HBS alums, business leaders, on what they thought about the role of business in society. And then finally, next to him, Christine Perch, who is at the New Belgium Brewery Company, the CFO and COO, also on the board of directors of the company. It's a company that produces 850,000 barrels in 37 states distributed, also Canada as well. It's certified as a B Corporation, 100% employee owned. And so we're really trying to bridge the social as well as the financial aspects of business very much in terms of the core of how the company is run. And so it's a delight to have all of the panelists here. I'm going to ask by starting each person, and we'll start with you, Julie, 60 seconds, just a brief introduction to yourself and particularly your role related to creating shared value.
Sure. And can I just get a quick show of hands? How many people had heard of FSG before signing up for this panel? Oh, that's excellent. It's good to see. I think there's probably more people in this room that actually work at FSG, so this is as you said, I'm a senior consultant at FSG. I've been there for about 2.5 years. I work mostly on shared value projects, and I've been doing that for about 2 years. Right now, I'm in conjunction with Professor Carter, actually, and a couple of other managing directors at FSG, writing a white paper on creating shared value in the extractive sector. So happy to be here, and thanks for organizing that.
Hi guys, great to be here, good to be back. I spent 3 years here at Harvard while I was going for a PhD, so it's really nice to be back and actually see this topic on the agenda. I joined Tom's about 2 years ago when they called and said they're looking for a chief giving officer. I was like, what the heck is that? But once I started talking to the company, there's one reason why I ended up taking this job and moving from New York City to Los Angeles, and that is because the company was started with a mission from the minute it got kicked off. Essentially, the mission was the reason why the company is in business. We announced last year that we gave 10 million pairs of shoes away since the company was started. So it's been an economic success. But what's even more interesting is that we're now really thinking deep about what's the impact. What is the impact that every transaction that we've made so far has had and is going to have for the communities that we're involved in. We're actually in over 60 countries now with over 100 non-for-profit partners. So it's been an interesting ride. So I'm happy to talk more about it. Thanks.
Want me to go first? Hi everyone, I'm Christine Parrish with New Belgium Brewing Company. New Belgium is the third largest craft brewer in the U.S. Our signature beer is Fat Tire. So how many of you have heard of New Belgium or Fat Tire? We don't even sell here, so that's exciting. I've been with the company almost 14 years. I started as the controller. I have a CPA background. Moved into CFO, and now I have the shared title of CFO and COO, which I don't recommend. It's a lot. But it's been fun to sort of evolve throughout the company, especially from the financial side with regard to shared value and what that means and how you grow a company, maintain profitability, and do all the things that you need to do as a CFO. So excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Joe Bauer, and I teach at Harvard Business School and have for a long time. And I guess when people ask, what is it you teach, I generally say how to run companies. And what I think, you want louder in the back? Okay. And I guess what my view is that what we're talking about is the need probably to have language that gets us away from where the economists have taken the field of management, but that well-run companies have been taking a broad view of their mission for a long time.
So on that note, in terms of language, the first question I'd like to get your thoughts on is, how do you define shared value? And is it a useful concept in your own work? Christine, can we start with you?
Sure. Shared value is interesting. It's not a term that we use at New Belgium, but I think for us, it's almost in the most literal sense. We're 100% ESOP, and so the value that we create as a business is shared amongst our coworkers. So in that respect, it's a very literal translation of shared value. I do think, we talk more in terms of triple bottom line or quadruple bottom line and looking at more than profitability, but looking at, how you treat your coworkers, how you treat your community, how you show up in the world, being thoughtful about the resources that you use in your process, that type of thing.
So I think of shared value as a way of talking about what well-managed companies have done for decades. And I think companies with a long-term view have always invested in their communities. They've always reflected their personal values. They've always invested in their workforce. And they've always tried to reflect societal values as they change. And I guess Johnson & Johnson's credo, I don't know, some of you may know that the credo was developed by Robert Woods Johnson sometime in the 1930s. And it basically says if you take care of the doctors and the nurses and the patients and the employees and the community, the shareholder will be just fine, thank you. And if you go to IBM framed its mission in very broad terms, going back to Tom Watson in the 1920s. And this was at a time when the competitor, National Cash Register, had thugs going around with sledgehammers breaking the products of their competitors. So it wasn't obvious. It wasn't that all companies did, but they did. Tom Watson Jr. was explaining to his workforce that if he heard about someone that was not treating women equally, this is in the 1970s, they would leave because IBM couldn't afford not to take advantage of half the workforce. If you look at Cummins Engine, if you notice, these have different kinds of customers, some sell to consumers, some Cummins Engine was turning southern Indiana town of Columbus into the 10th on the list of top 10 cities in the United States, ranked by the architects. It's done a phenomenal job of building the labor force in the community. J. Irwin Miller talked about the importance of intelligent self-interest as opposed to selfish interest. And that was in the, so I guess we can go on because there's a long list. What we discovered when we wrote this book, talking to people, was that a lot of business people were deeply disturbed by things such as Milton Friedman saying that the social responsibility of business is to make a profit. They thought that was pretty dangerous and really nonsense. And they were terrified of the financial markets and their lack of stability. So I guess my own view is that maybe this is useful language, but good management, we have big problems. We still don't have the banking system under control. But if shared value helps, that's fine.
Tom's, just like what Christine said, we don't use the term shared value, but I can tell you just based on the discussion we're having today, it is really, it's fundamental to our business model. I think if we didn't have the business model, or if the business model of, our motto is we're in business to improve people's lives. If we didn't have the one-for-one model, meaning you purchase something and we do something for one person in need, I think our main differentiator in the marketplace would go away. And we would have a very, very different company. And ever since, so what that means for us is that we're making decisions for the long term. So in other words, when we launch a new product category, like for instance, we just came out with Tom's Coffee, which is our third product. When we started talking about this about a year ago, and sat down with the CEO and the founder, and we talked about what are the main needs that communities in emerging markets really need and we need to provide support for. What are those critical needs that we want to tackle next? And then iterate around what's the product that we want to launch against this. Now clearly the product needs to be profitable, it needs to be good, it needs to be priced right, it needs to be marketed correctly. But for us, the next topic that we always iterate around is what is the social mission we attach to this product, and does it make sense? Does the community, does our customer base, would they associate this with us? Is it authentic? Is it real? Is it fundamental? And then in the end, we launch a product with all these components in place. So I think that is something for us. That's the way we look at shared value or its social impact. And you can expect that whatever we do, we make these long-term decisions. So for instance, with the launch of coffee, we support the supply of safe water. And that's sort of one area, water and sanitation, that we wanted to get into. We also sometimes, when we spoke about this earlier, we make long-term strategic decisions, like for instance, local manufacturing, that I think don't make sense in the short term. They cost a lot of money, they're significant in the investment level, we can talk a little bit more about that, but those are things that we do that I think are in association, closely associated with the mission that we have.
I think that a lot of us are in sort of agreement, we'll discuss more. But the way that we describe shared value at FSG is it's a business strategy that actually delivers business return while also delivering measurable social outcome. And I think measurable is a really important word on both the business side and the social side, and it's something that we try to help our clients think through. If you have a philanthropic program that delivers services in a community, but you're not really sure what the result of those are, and you're not really sure what the impact of that is on the business, we would say that's not shared value. I would agree, Joe, that long-term thinking companies and well-run companies think that way. I can tell you that many of the clients that I have had do not. And they say I need to report out next quarter, And if I make this investment in a social need that will pay off for the company in 10 years, well, or 5 years, that's not going to show up on my bottom line. I'm going to get slammed, and I can't make that investment. So I do think it's helpful language, especially if you're able to show there's quantifiable business and social benefit on both sides.
I wonder if we can dive a little bit more deeply into Sebastian and Christine, sort of the business model for your two companies, and then get Sheila and Joe to reflect on that. And so you mentioned that as you launched your third product, coffee, that the social criterion, in a sense, it sounds to me like that was the first gate. That determines then the kind of product that you launch. And so if a critical aspect of creating shared value is actually deciding which products you launch based on their value for society, I mean, that's one way of thinking about it. In fact, that's one of the criteria that Porter and Kramer suggest. That puts social, it sounds to me like it puts social first before financial. And so is this true? And have you encountered any tensions within the firm around that kind of decision making? And then similarly, the same question to Christine as to whether that affects how you make decisions as the New Belgian brewer.
That's a great question. I work for a serial entrepreneur, so we constantly talk about new products. But in terms of the balance, and we've put a lot of product ideas on the side for various reasons. It is more of an iterative process than a first this, then that kind of thing. I mean, we've been ideating around multiple ideas, but ultimately, there's two things that are important. One is, whatever product you launch has to have a significant social impact associated with it. We know what areas we'd like to explore on the social impact side, and we will pair those up with the product ideas we have. But we would never launch a product that is not at a quality level that we can deliver at a price point that we believe is competitive in the marketplace and that has a long-term perspective towards financial success. That wouldn't make any sense. What we have to do is we have to think one more level in the P&L, and that is, how do we make sure that the social impact component that is associated with each product sale can be executed. That means, do we have the right partners? Do we have credibility in the marketplace? Would the consumers make the connection between the product and what we sell? And do we have enough of an ability to differentiate ourselves in the marketplace? So it's a bit more complex than that, but it does start with a need and then goes through this iterative process. And it takes sometimes, it takes multiple iterations before we say this product is ready, it's viable, and we can support it.
Can you give us a concrete example?
I mean, this coffee thing, right? For instance, I mean, it was something where we said, like, look, if you think about critical needs in emerging, in communities, in impoverished communities in emerging markets, in low-income countries, there's sort of I'd say 4, 5, 6, 7 needs that everybody would agree on, whether it's Millennium Development Goals and so forth. It's water, sanitation, it's health, it's education, it's nutrition, it's shelter, violence-free, gender equity, and ultimately in the middle there's always economic advancement, job opportunities, and so forth that lead towards that. So we always look at those areas and say, like, who is doing progressive, innovative, impact-related work in that space? And water is one of the areas that we've been interested in for a long time. We know a bunch of NGOs that do really good work in the water space. So we always thought about, like, what is a good product that could be connected to it? When we started thinking about it, coffee came to the forefront because high-quality coffee uses an insane amount of water in order for it to differentiate in the marketplace. The more water you use, the higher the quality of the coffee is. So what's crazy about it is that in the countries where you wash the coffee, you also have a safe water crisis. So we thought, wow, if we source a product that will be sourced and is a high commodity impact product in the marketplace, what better cause to link it to than saying, let's work with partners that build sustainable water systems for those communities that currently don't have it. So we come full circle around it. So I don't know if that helps a little bit to illustrate, but that's how we look good stuff. And then, of course, you run the coffee P&L, right? I mean, you got to make that work. For us, it's a brand new category. We were never in coffee before, so we had to learn, it's like, what are the main drivers of success in a marketplace that is saturated with strong competitors? Starbucks, Dunkin', you name it.
So how is this similar or different in the beer business?
It's pretty different, actually. I mean, our mission is not a socially driven one. It's rather we have a set of core values and beliefs that define how we go to the market. We made a decision a long time ago to grow. We had something pretty good going on. We made it through the 90s in the beer category, and we wanted to provide opportunity for our coworkers. And so we decided we would do that, but we would do it in a really responsible way. So, every decision that we make, we reflect upon those core values, and those include things like being environmentally conscious, being socially conscious, being conscious about the fact that we make alcohol and, good responsible drinking. And, so it's really just a part of our everyday life and how we show up. And I think our social impact is really more one of community. So we try to really focus on our community of coworkers and our communities in which we sell. So we give away $1 per barrel. So for every barrel of beer that we sell, we donate $1 to some philanthropic thing. And that will vary depending on what community that we're in and what the needs are. We do fundraising events all the time. I don't know if anyone's ever been to a Tour de Fat. No. If you ever have a chance to go to a Tour de Fat, it's a lot of fun. It's basically a huge circus, but that generates a lot of money that goes to different nonprofits in that community. So, as far as making decisions as a business, we always say you can be as groovy and as cool as you want to be, but if you aren't making money, you're not going to last very long. So, it's really that ability to sustain what you're doing. And for New Belgium, it's really about proving out that you can grow and you can be profitable and you can do it in a way that you want to do it. You can be conscientious about how you show up in the planet. So, that's kind of our big drive. To give you an example, we're growing like crazy, and we're building a second brewery. So right now we manufacture everything out of Fort Collins, Colorado, but we're building a second site. And that decision was made a lot based on the environmental impact that we have by shipping glass all over the country. Not only is it expensive, but it's also environmentally not so fabulous. So, that decision was made not only from a profit standpoint, but also from an environmental standpoint, as well as getting back to that, giving our coworkers opportunity to grow and being able to go into another community outside of Fort Collins and hopefully make an impact.
Go ahead, Joe.
Well, I think these both are really good examples of what I think the issue is. So if you look at the list that Sebastian made, it's very similar to the list that we have in this book. There are a set of problems that we're facing globally that ought to be top of mind. And so, for example, there are about, there will be, I should say, 2030, there'll be about 4.2 billion workers in the world. About 3.6 will be in less developed countries. And of those, about 3.2, 3.4 will have enough skills. So, yes, capitalism has done amazing things. The middle class has just grown astonishingly, from something like 400 million to 1 billion too. It's amazing what happened. But not too far from now, we're going to be in a world where 3/4 of the workforce, 3.2 billion people, are poor, without skills. And that's really unstable. I mean, that's just around the corner, and it's unstable. If you look at water, it's a huge issue. And it's coming fast. And if you look at the two together, lead to migration. Huge migration is underway, has to, because the places where people live are drying up. And they're poor, and what people normally do if they can, they'll walk. Basically, when we hear about these boats sinking, a lot of them are making it, but people are desperate. And we also know what happens. We get wars out of that. There's corruption. there's breakdown of law. There are very, very serious issues that should be top of mind. So then, if you start thinking about what am I going to do with my business, you can do it in the context of that. One of my favorites is China Mobile. The east coast of China is 400 million people. Each of them, by, 2002, everybody had a cell phone. Some had more than one. And if you're China Mobile, you're now in desperate competition against two other major Chinese companies. So the government, as governments do, was just pleading with companies to please do something about rural China, and as companies do, China Mobile said, okay, we'll do something, and they did the minimum. And then they got a new CEO who said, how are we going to grow? We need those 700 million people as customers. And then they devised a strategy to sell them cell phones, and then to sell them value-added services. And in the process, they brought 700 million rural Chinese into the market system. So it's had a huge impact. If you think about it, that's 700 million is a big number. But it's basically the same thing. It's how are we going to grow this company? Well, if we're big and we want, then it better be something very big. So one of the interesting things about all those problems that need solving is they're huge, which means they constitute huge economic opportunity. And the good companies are paying a lot of attention to those, because that's where they can really grow. It's much easier to try and grow into a huge market than into a highly competitive small market. And so each one of these things, consumer finance, my God, 40% of the population in this country is not banked, and they don't have savings. It's a huge opportunity. But you got to learn how to do it on small margins. Well, we have, anyway, there's a lot of opportunity out there which will create value and solve important problems. I don't know that it helps to call that shared value, but if it does, fine, let's call it shared value.
Sheila, if we could get your perspective on this, and given your role as a consultant to companies that are building out some sort of a way of thinking about shared value, and so you've seen a bunch of different industries. So it's really a two-part question. One is, what is driving these firms? Is it similar to what we've heard, or is there something that we're missing here? And B, have you ever consulted to a firm and you come out thinking, I'm not sure this is going to work?
Those are both great and related questions.
You don't have to say which one.
So to the first question, it's kind of funny. I think we actually get companies that are at one or other end of a spectrum. We get clients who come in and are really sophisticated and have been thinking about these issues deeply, and as Joe said, recognize these really deep social needs as a big business opportunity and just need help from our end of trying to help them frame what the business model looks like, what the revenue flows might be, what the social benefit might be, and how to best go about measuring and capturing that. So that's one end. The other end is companies who've had some sort of really big PR disaster or a really big black eye recently, and who come to us and say, we got to do something different. Porter says this works, so why don't we work with you? And those companies tend to be driven by the idea that shared value is about gaining reputation. And that's really not sort of at the basis of what we would call shared value at FSG. So we get, I'm stylizing here, there's obviously companies in the middle, but usually we get companies who are really sophisticated and just need help refining that strategy, and companies at the other end. I'll just share a quick anecdote about one client that I had to really illustrate how that mind shift happens, to your point. We were working for a really large agricultural company, and we asked them, so what's your mission, what's your statement? And it wasn't really driven, like some of the statements that we've heard, by social media. It was really improving productivity per acre. That's what we do. We create better seed technology, we create better fertilizers, we improve irrigation systems. That's what we do, we improve yield per acre. And over the course of several months, we got them to a point where they were thinking about defining their mission as solving global hunger. And if you're an ag company and you take that on, as opposed to how do you improve productivity per acre, you start to see tremendous opportunity. You start to see, well, how do I go from reducing the waste in the supply chain in developing countries, that's 50% right now. 50% of everything that's grown on farms in developing countries goes to waste before it gets to market. If I solve that from a business perspective, look at the social value I could possibly create. Bangladesh actually produces more food than it needs in theory, but it produces it in a very cyclical way. So Bangladesh has the highest number of hungry people in the world. So if you thought about, as an agricultural company, how do you smooth that out? What kind of products could you introduce during the slow growing season, during the fallow season? And you see the business opportunity there. There's just tremendous opportunity. And that's all very grandiose and hopefully inspiring sounding. But at the end of the day, there's companies that just say, so you go through this whole speech about what the business benefit and the social benefit is, and you get to the end and you ask if there are any questions, and the person will say, yeah, is that going to improve my reputation though? And so those are the clients where you kind of throw up your hands and say, well, yeah, maybe, but maybe you need someone else to help you do that. And maybe we'll talk later in a few years, and maybe a little bit further along.
To get your thoughts sort of on this issue, in a sense, I'm guessing that most of the people in this room are here because at some level you believe this is important. And our panelists seem very committed to this idea as well. And Chile used the term sort of a mindset or a mind shift. And I know from the work of Joe and my colleague, Rebecca Henderson, that some of the companies that really are willing to think differently about this have people in them at the top positions that are committed. Because the evidence in terms of the benefits on the bottom line is not always immediately apparent. And so it leaves me kind of wondering that unless you're partly a believer to begin with, are we only going to get sort of the companies and the leaders that are believers to begin with actually doing this to some degree? And so in your experiences, and perhaps we can start with you, Christine, you're an employee-owned firm. You're probably relatively distinctive on that in terms of other beer companies. So when you interact with your peers, how do you see that as being radically different from them? And do you think that a mind shift is possible among your peers around this issue?
We are different in the employee ownership, but there's a lot of shared values among craft brewers, so I don't think there's, and I'm speaking specifically about craft brewers, not maybe the bigger brewers. And it's interesting, since the time that we did the 100% ESOP transaction, which was about a year and a half ago, I've had several calls from craft brewers wanting to know, how did you do this? What does it look like? So I think that, there's also people that have this value set, but they're not really sure how to articulate it or make it meaningful. And so I think there's a lot of room for education for people of how do you create a succession plan that's meaningful? How can you show up differently? So, fortunately, we're in an industry where there's a lot of sort of shared values in that regard.
Sebastian?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So before I came here, we talked a little bit about some of the questions that we were discussed today, and I thought this is a good one. So what I did was I actually went to my CFO, COO, and said, how would you answer this? And he said, and I think it made total sense to me, he said, well, we at Tom's, we self-select. So essentially, you would not be at Tom's, especially not in a leadership position, unless you bought into the model. It just doesn't make sense to come to this company. Because you probably would be better off someplace else.
I mean, I just want to push the two of them a little bit further, and then I
Same thing, I just want to feedback.
I'm going to ask you to hold on just for a second. So in a sense, if that's true, so if you're self-selected, and if the craft brewers sort of share values, so to play devil's advocate here, the argument is that, well, you're then always sort of playing within this niche. Does it really have the possibility to grow where it is the dominant value paradigm? So you're a B-certified corporation, and in some sense, perhaps the idea is that B-certification becomes the norm. But it's still a drop in the bucket. So how do you think about your role as being about bigger than this particular niche?
Do you want me to go? Look, I mean, clearly you self-select in our company, but that doesn't mean we don't have healthy debate about specific strategic decisions. So I would be lying to you if I would be always the one saying, hey, let's get grounded, this is always the most important thing. Not. There's a healthy debate that's going on. Like, for instance, let me give an example. Joe talked about the employment crisis in developing countries. So one topic that's still, we still debate a lot amongst ourselves in the leadership team is the decision to manufacture at least 1/3 of our giving shoes, the shoes that we essentially provide to the children in the communities outside or in the regions where we actually have partnerships. So that meant India, Kenya, Ethiopia, we started in Argentina, and then in September we announced the most difficult of all, and that is Haiti. So to your point, those are people that get these jobs, they're fairly unskilled, that often have never even had a job before, and we've now created 800 jobs. Now I would be lying to you if that was a decision without a financial impact. It costs more. And we decided as a company to go down that path, and Haiti is really probably the most challenging amongst all of them. We know, but it's also the one where we believe as a small company, as a privately held company, if we can make it work there, and we just started production, so the first shoes are coming out of that factory now. If we can make it work in Haiti, we hope that we will be a catalyst for other companies to see that it's possible in Haiti, and that over time we create a better type of economic environment for other companies in the US to invest. Now, the long-term decision is clearly to have social impact, but in addition, we're also thinking about potentially at some point manufacturing our commercial shoes in Haiti. And what we would hope for is that is something that would be recognized in the marketplace, and that shoes made in Haiti would actually find a customer base here. So it's really long-term thinking here, and we don't know, we can't wrap a nice, tight business plan around it that says in 2 years, this will be clearly at a profitability level of X, but we're willing as a privately held company to take that risk.
A couple things. One, to piggyback on the self-selection, we just experienced this where we interviewed someone from a big brewery to come to New Belgium and actually declined the offer because they're not used to being so collaborative. So I do think there's some self-selection that goes on. As far as us being a niche and craft beer being sort of specific in the way they show up, I think that's true. But I think, one, you have other companies that want to emulate what we do because they see that you can do it and be profitable. The other thing is the consumer pull. So craft beer hasn't grown the way that it's grown only because we make great beer, but also because we show up differently, and consumers really appreciate that. So, you can kind of look at it from two directions. You can look at it from, are other bigger companies going to want to emulate what you're doing? But you can also say, really all ends with the consumer, right? Where's the cash register ring? So if the people that you're selling to are compelled by your business story and what you do, they're going to start buying more, and by default, you're going to grow. And craft has grown tremendously in large measure due to that.
So I just wanted to, I'm fascinated by the huge impact story. So one of the interesting ones is IBM under Sam Palmisano, because they almost went out of business in the early 90s, and Lou Gerstner really turned it around, and then Palmisano took over, and basically had this idea, normal, working with very smart people on strategy, that the big markets were system solutions to major problems, period. Traffic in cities, So the traffic system in Singapore, the traffic system in London, those sit on IBM platforms. There's the China Mobile system that sits on an IBM platform. The work being done, everybody knows about personal medicine, the genome. That's, you remember the artificial intelligence that goes into Watson, who plays not chess, but also Jeopardy. That's what's being used essentially to start cracking the code on genomic medicine. So then, at really hard work, about 3 years in the marketing group, they came up with this idea, solutions for a smarter planet. It's a brilliant marketing. So what do you think happens once you start marketing a smarter planet and smarter cities? One of the hardest problems facing high-tech companies starts going away because recruiting, particularly in Asia, where it's very high-tech, everybody wants to work at IBM now. Young people. Retention is very high. So I guess my sense is they put, I think, $100 million a year into a program where teams compete with projects that they want to work on that deal with local problems in their country where they're working. I mean, it sounds like a lot of money. In fact, it's generated lots of system products that they sell, and drives up retention. So I guess my feeling is that if you calculate it, how are we going to make money on this? You get the problem that Joey was talking about. You can be very, very cynical about that. It's a kind of Dilbert phenomenon. But if you just look at it, and within the resources that make sense for your business. I had a grandfather who built a business that involved part of it with laundry at a time when the sweatshop laundries were the characteristic in the United States. He air-conditioned his laundry. And the industry association freaked out. And they said, how can you do that? And he said, why should they work when it's hot? We can make it cool. So people like to work there, but employees do. I mean, it's how you have to stay within the realm of economics. But beyond that, you can't calculate this stuff. The thing, Yogi Berra about numbers, the whole problem with forecasting is that it has to do with the future. And, the numbers are terrible. And we turn out people, you can get any numbers you want with Excel. Hire an MBA, they know how to do it. You've got to be able to think through what's happening, where are the big forces, how are you going to build something that's sustainable? And then we're living in an era where the big forces happen to be big social problems. So when you figure out how to make money solving them, you're sharing value.
So Joe, hearing you, it sounds like that doing shared value sounds just like good long-term business. It's good long-term management. There's good business opportunities. You've talked to and interviewed a lot of people for your book. How common is this?
Well, another way of putting it is, it's good strategy. I've met in my life maybe 10 good strategists. It's hard to do this stuff. That's why companies cycle. You were saying, this isn't it. Well run over a sustained period of time. I think I was telling you the numbers earlier. It's very rare for companies to stay in the top decile of performance over 2 decades. 4 decades, there are about 10 companies in the Fortune 500. So, it's hard. If business were easy, people wouldn't make as much money when they succeed.
So if it's hard, if it's as hard as good strategy, does that mean we should not expect to see very much of it?
No, that's why been very careful. I haven't said there's anything wrong with shared value. If this language helps people see the value in doing it, then it's great. But the basic problem is just to get things right. And you just, it's like ethics in business. Of course you should be ethical, but as a practical matter, what it means is you have to know where the foul line is and stay away from it. And you can see when you're dealing with people pretty fast. And unfortunately, particularly if you're dealing with Wall Street, it's not a happy thing. So it's the same problem. People, I think it is self-selection. And companies, the good companies recruit very, very, very carefully. And they interview very, very carefully. And they'll let 10 people interview one person before they hire them. Because you got to get it right. One person can really screw up your company.
Sheila, what do you think? Do you agree? Are the barriers here really that it's difficult, that it's self-selection? Is that what's holding this back?
Yeah, I think the biggest barrier is the perception that there's a trade-off between investing in society and business returns. That is the single biggest barrier. I mean, when I used to work at Oliver Wyman, and no disrespect, I think they do great work. I remember a project I was on in upstate New York for a utility, developing back office KPIs for their shared services department. Now, I would walk into rooms and people's eyes would just glaze over. Oh gosh, here come the consultants again to tell us about the 75 KPIs they're tracking. That's just, it's not that exciting to talk about how quickly you turn around a PO. I go into companies today and say, hey, what are you going to do about the workforce situation? How are you going to solve water? How are you going to provide access to energy? And people get excited and want to talk about it. And people are like, oh, FSG's back again. This is great. And we had a presentation we did last week for a client that was a small team meeting, like 15 folks. And something like 50 people showed up. Because they're like, oh, we love it when these guys talk. We get to think about these really interesting issues. So I think that there's a latent desire to do this, but it's kind of dampened by this perception that it's going to be a trade-off. It's going to cost me money, it's going to make my shareholders angry, and it's not going to really deliver business value. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to create those models, to create those examples that show actually it's not a trade-off. You can do this, you can have a massive business impact.
Any experience on your side, Sebastian, you've seen in terms of, is it not a trade-off? Have you faced situations where you feel like it is?
Well, let me quickly respond, because I think it is an investment, but the question is how you look at this investment, right? Is it a cost center, or is it really a long-term investment? And I think that's what it comes down to. I mean, the question for us is, to your point, the social issues are out there. The companies that are attacking it are still not in relation to how big the issues are. And the question is, how many more companies may begin to look at this as a long-term investment opportunity? If I look at the consumer today, which is something for us that's important, and say like, how many consumers are actually willing to make purchase decisions that are driven by the perception of the brand versus just the price or the quality of the product? I think data is out there, but it seems like at least there's a growing trend of consumers saying like, I would support a company more, and I make a buying decision based on how I perceive that company's commitment to doing something beyond being successful as a financial enterprise. So if the consumer starts being more demanding, like they were sort of on the organic side just a few years ago, right? I mean, a few years ago, people were saying, I'm not going to spend 50%, 70% more just to buy organic. Now, you can almost go into any store and find organic food. So it's the consumer that has a significant power over where companies are going. And I think if that continues, and if we can make the products that are good and price competitive and have a social impact, then I think that this will be less of a cost center and more of an investment going forward, because it's almost like your entry ticket to being in business.
So, what headlines in many, many, many countries, talent shortage. We can't hire people good enough to work in our, well, what a bizarre way of thinking about the role of a company in a market. I mean, if you train them. And Cummins Engine, one of my favorites, that had done an amazing job in Columbus, Indiana, really, and not with a ton of money, but with skillful helping and building coalitions in the community to drive up the quality of the education system to the point where they can expand, and this was they've gone into a desperately poor county next over, and they're building their highest tech, biggest product there, which is very important to have it nearby because of IP problems. That it was very important to have the engineers nearby so they could control intellectual property. And it wasn't cheaper to put it somewhere else, in fact. Well, they've done such a good job in general getting the talent level up. Toyota is bringing manufacturing, not assembly, manufacturing into Columbus, Indiana. So you begin to take a school system that couldn't support a company, and now it's supporting a cluster of companies. And we're going to try and do this in Boston. There's no reason why, with all this teaching talent around and with all the companies around, they all need people, and we have communities like Malden and so on, and we can drive up the quality of the school system and make this even more prosperous. And I mean, and it's not, what we need is talent. We're solving the talent problem of companies. We're not, we're not doing it because the primary purpose is social. If we didn't solve the problem, we'd have to move somewhere else.
I agree with a lot of what Sebastian said. The one thing I would add is there's a difference between a trade-off and a sucker's choice. And I think oftentimes companies feel like it's a sucker's choice. It's always one or the other. And oftentimes the truth is somewhere in the middle. And I think that it just takes experience of making those decisions and having them pay off in a way that you didn't even anticipate. So, we talk a lot about unintended consequences, but some of the time those are positive. And as an example, years ago, New Belgium went to the coworkers and said, we want to use wind power. It's going to cost more money. We think it's the right thing to do, and we had people vote on it. And people voted for it, and they voted on it knowing that they would probably lose their profit sharing that year because it was going to cost more money. It was not in the business plan. But the positive unintended consequence of that is people that be like, okay, we made this investment, we may not get profit sharing, we need to show up differently, better, work harder. And the level of accountability that you start to increase with your workforce is tremendous. And it makes a huge difference. When we have our auditors come in and we talk about, theft and, do you have worries, we all kind of chuckle with each other because when you're employee-owned, who are you stealing from? You're stealing from yourself. You're stealing from your friend. You're not stealing from the big man or the big woman. You're stealing from yourself. And so I think that for us, that component of employee ownership is huge in what it does for how people show up every day and the productivity that we have. So it's more expensive to be employee-owned, but the productivity and the satisfaction that you get is far greater. So I think some of it is just companies not fully understanding, what's a trade-off versus what's a selfish choice.
I want to ask one more question to the panel, and then we'll open it up so that we've got at least a half hour for questions. And the question is how does globalization affect the possibility for creating shared value? And so in the sense that, it seems that one of the premises of creating it is the ability to create some kind of a community, which would seem to be difficult to do if you're a global firm with suppliers all over the world. It's post-forest production, you're assembling things that haven't been manufactured in your own facility. You may be going where labor is cheaper. So how do you think about this within a global economy? Christine, can we start with you?
No, let's not. I'm not in a global economy. I mean, when you were talking about that, my first thought was this whole local movement that we've seen for quite some time, and we even feel that at a New Belgium level where, you know, we were talking earlier about all the small breweries. I mean, they're everywhere now. Fort Collins alone has like 20 breweries, and we're not a big town, 100,000 people. So that local movement, I think, is a huge pushback to the globalization. And I don't know where those two are going to meet, but I feel like, much like New Belgium making the choice to build a second facility rather than to transship all over the country, is going to be the way that many companies go, and that you create that local effect, if you will.
I'm not quite sure where to take this, but we're also not quite a global firm yet. I mean, most of our business is still in the United States. But one area that I'm personally very interested in is, as we're now expanding in some of the main European markets, is to understand the difference between the marketplace in the US for a company like Tom's versus the marketplaces in countries like the UK, Germany, and France. And I think what we're finding is that customization is needed to some degree, because the concept of social enterprise, the concept of a mission-driven company, is less well understood in some of the markets that I'm talking about. And that's going to be an interesting ride for us, and I'm sure we're going to make a ton of mistakes getting into those marketplaces. We will make assumptions that will not hold true. We will put some sort of a public brand awareness face forward that people may have more questions about. Some people in those markets will be more skeptical. They would expect the government to take care of big social issues versus a company stepping in saying, hey, we can do something and contribute to it. So I'm anticipating that as we go into these markets, we'll learn a ton, and we'll find out to what extent there is a global type of receptivity for social enterprise as we're developing it.
I think there's a few different ways in which you can create shared value. And a lot of it is community-based, like Columbus, Indiana, and building up a cluster around your company there. And I think globalization may or may not have an impact on those. And then there's other ways in which you can create shared value, like creating new products for the bottom of the pyramid. So Sebastian, if in 10 years you're selling a $1 shoe in sub-Saharan Africa, that's going to happen because of globalization. So I think there's opportunities that globalization creates, and then there's a series of traditional opportunities that happen at the community level as well.
Well, this one I think is a really complicated question, because there are companies, Cummins would be one, by the way, that feels, IBM another, wherever they're operating, they try to be a good citizen, and they take that as part of it. But I've been in a room like this not too long ago where the head of one of the major financial institutions, when discussing this kind of question, said, well, look, when I'm here with my 200 top people in our firm, most of them aren't, well, the majority aren't American. And I'm not sure I think that they care a lot about what happens in the United States. So I'm not sure I can as their leader. And I found that terrifying. And I think there are global firms that are citizens of no place. And I think they actually are a problem, because there's a kind of amorality. They may think they're moral, but there's a kind of amorality that develops when we're just a global economic enterprise. We're not a citizen, or we're a citizen of the world. I mean, that's crap. There are a lot of those. So I think globalization is a two-edged sword. I love the companies that are doing things that are going to really, I think, contribute to the solution of major problems we face. And I'm terrified of the ones that are going to be making things worse. And there are a lot of those too.
So on that cheery note, let's open up the floor for questions. I'm going to take 2 or 3 questions at once, and then we'll get the panel to respond. So please tell us your name
Hi, my name's Chris. I grew up in New Jersey, but I live here now.